Alright, so far in the previous videos here we talked about a void function and we talked about a parameterized function. In this video we're going to talk about value returning functions and what that means. Okay, basically we know it's a value returning function because you'll see the return instruction inside of a function. Alright, so let's create ourselves a couple functions. We're going to define a function called total age, and it's going to accept age 1 and age 2. Alright, so it's going to accept two parameters from some outside force. And what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the result, okay, it's just a variable, of age 1 plus age 2, and we're going to return the result. Okay, so it's a simple function called total age. It's going to accept two parameters. We're going to add them together, store it as result, and then we're going to return that value. So now, define main. We're going to create a variable called first age, and we're going to ask for an integer input. Please, we're going to put enter first age. Okay, nothing real high tech or fancy. Second age, we're going to make it an integer. We're going to ask for enter second age. Okay, again, nothing fancy. And then what we're going to do is we are going to call the function, so total age, and we're going to send it first age and second age. Now, since we are going to have a value come back, we need a variable to hold that value. So I'm going to put down here sum of ages is equal to. Alright, so what's going to happen now is it's going to come through the main function, so we got to make sure we call that. So I'm going to come down here and call main. Okay, now what happens is it's going to call main function. It's going to prompt the user enter in the first age, prompt the user enter in the second age, and then it's going to call this function total age. It's going to send two positional arguments, or two, right? First age and second age, whatever they put in here. That's going to go up to this function. So first age is going to go up to position 1. Second age is going to go to position 2. It's going to add them together, store them as this value, this variable, and return that back. So whatever it returns back is going to replace this and store that as this variable. And then I can print the sum of the ages is sum of ages. Whoops, sum of ages. Okay? So it's going to print whatever that value is. Okay? If you need to, go ahead and pause the video a moment so you can type that in. Alright, so now that you're back and you've got that typed in, let's go ahead and run this. So I'm going to run it, and obviously it's going to ask me to save it. So let's put this in my Python folder here. Age summations. That's what I'm going to call it. Alright, enter first age. 40 and 38. Some of the ages is 78. Works for me. Okay. So what actually happened? Well, like we said, we have this main function that we're calling, right here. We're prompting the user for two values. Two ages is what we're prompting them for. And then we're going to call this function and send them two positional parameters because that's what's being asked for. So these go up here in position. we do our total, we get a result, and then we return that back. The return keyword is what's important. This is what tells me I'm going to send back this value. So that value goes back, and the key is it replaces this whole little section right here. So it becomes that the sum of the ages is equal to whatever that result was, in this case 78. Okay? Now, do I have to do this way? Well, no, I could do something as simple as this. Instead of doing these calculations like this, I can just do this. Return age 1 plus age 2. Okay? It's still going to work, okay? It's still going to take this expression and evaluate it, and then whatever that expression yields as a result, it's going to return that back down to here. Well, sorry, back to here, actually. So it evaluates this expression. So it still works the same way. Watch. If I run this, okay, I'll save it. 40, 38, right? It still allows me to do the same thing. So it's just a way in which I can maybe reduce the amount of code I write. Okay? But this is what they mean by a value returning function. Now, you don't have to return anything. Remember, we talked about that earlier. You don't have to return any kind of values. Matter of fact, you can use the return function by itself, and what it will do is it will abruptly end your code. Okay? Basically, it says, okay, we're done, and just jumps out. It's a quick way to terminate your code, and I'll show you that in a minute. But by and large, we use return to return some value back, and whether that value is a variable or expression. Now, the expression can be anything. Okay? It can be anything. It can be the value of an expression. It can be the value of a variable. It can be whatever you want, so long as you return back something. Okay? And remember, when you return it, it takes the place of whatever was called. So you have to make sure you have a variable here to do that. Now, here we're returning just one value. Could I return multiple values? Heck yeah, why not? You know? So let's just say, for example, we wanted to return back two values. Okay? So let's see, sum of ages and difference in ages. That sounds like fun. Okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to comment this out. Oh no, we'll leave that in there. I want to return we want to do the sum of, right? So we're going to say the sum of ages, okay, and we're going to do sum ages equals age 1 plus age 2, and diff ages equals age 1 minus age 2. All right. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return sum ages, comma, diff ages. So I'm going to return two values back. Now, because I'm returning two values, I have to be able to receive two values. So I'm going to say sum ages, comma, diff of ages. Okay? Because this is going to return back two values, right? There's 1, there's 2. I have to be able to receive 1 and 2. See, the same thing goes here as the vice versa. You know, when I send two values here and here, I'm sending two positional arguments because this function wants to receive two positional arguments. Okay? And because it does have to send two. Well, here I'm returning two values. Okay? And because I'm returning two values, I have to be able to retrieve two values. Okay? So I've got the sum of the ages is whatever, and I'm going to print the diff of the ages is, and we'll do diff of ages. Okay, so I'm able to receive back two values and have those values printed. So if I run this, we're going to put in 40, 38. Okay, you can see the sum of the ages is 78. The difference of the ages is 2. Because, again, what I did was I sent two values because they wanted to. I send two positional arguments because the function I'm calling, total age, requires 2. Now, because this function is returning two values, I need to have two variables here to get those two values. If I don't, then I'm going to have a huge issue, and we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that we don't miss something. So the question is, well, what happens if I don't do that? What happens if I only receive one? So say I only did sum of ages equals total age, first age, second age. Okay? Because we know that if we send more or less positional arguments than what this function wants, we get an error. But if they send back 2 and I'm only prepared to receive 1, will it give me an error? Yeah, let's find out. So I'll run this, and of course, I'll save it. First age, 40. Second age, 38. And notice what happens. It responds back with a tuple of 78 and 2. Now, I know we haven't talked about tuples yet. We'll get to that. But this is what happens. You don't get an error, but it sends back a tuple. Essentially, it's like a list, okay, of the values it returned. Okay? And they are positional. So now my sum of ages becomes a tuple of those two values. So you don't get an error, but you'll get potentially an unexpected result that you need to be prepared for. Okay? So like I said, you get this here as opposed to this here. And that's why it's important to understand and to think through some of this to make sure that you're getting exactly what you're asking for. Okay? Again, you will get an error if you send more or less positional arguments than what the program wants. But you will not get an error for returning more than what they're expecting to receive. They just put in a tuple. So you've got to be very careful. You've got to be very cautious because this can lead to other potential problems as you start to do arithmetic and things later down the line. Okay? So that is returning from the perspective of actually returning a value. But like I said, the return function doesn't have to return anything. You can use return all by itself and get a different kind of result. What this result is, it is the end of a program right away. Okay? So I'm going to create a new function here. So I'm going to file, new file. And I'm going to define a function called exploding bomb. Okay? And we're going to set a variable called explode to true. All right? And we're going to print 3, print 2, put a couple more of those out there, print 1, right? We're doing a little countdown. And then whoops, forgot my parenthesis. And then we're going to say if not explode, return. Otherwise, we're going to print, boom. Okay. So, real simple function. And then I'm going to go down here. Obviously, I need to call the exploding bomb function. Okay. So what this program is going to do is we have a function called exploding bomb. We set a variable of explode to true. Perfectly legal. We can do that. Okay. And then I'm going to print 3, 2, 1, and if not explode, meaning if explode is false, it's going to end the program. If explode is true, it's going to bypass this and print boom. All right, so I'm going to run this. And we're going to call this one, all right, it's in my Python folder. We're going to call this exploding bomb test. Man, if people hear me say that too loud, it's going to be have the FBI after me for creating bombs. All right, so down here you can see 3, 2, 1, and then boom. Because explode is equal to true. Now, what if I do this? Exploding bomb, and we're going to say explode is equal false. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to send it explode. Now, let me back up for a second. You notice that when I didn't send anything in, it was okay. The reason why this is okay is because this positional argument has a value. Since it has a value defined, I don't have to pass it anything. Now I can say explode equals false. And what this will do is it will override the value for explode and make it false, which is going to change the makeup of my program. Let me show you. Run. So if I run this now, okay, notice it went 3, 2, 1, and then nothing. Because what return does is just says end the function now. See, the 4 print statements are all in this function, but because if not explode was true, because explode equals false, it said return done. Now let me just show you, okay, just so you can see, print bomb has been disarmed. Okay, so I'm going to put that in there just so you can see that it actually does do something inside this if statement. All right, so if I, again, leave exploding bomb, I don't put anything in there, and run this, okay, 3, 2, 1, boom. Because, again, explode is true, print, 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 if not explode, well, explode is true, so this is false, so it skips this, and prints that, and it's done. If I say explode equals false, though, now I can do this here or here. I'm going to pass it explode equal to false. Going to run it. 3, 2, 1. Bomb has been disarmed. It got in here and did return. You can think of return in this fashion, similar to break. Now I say similar, okay? Similar because what break does is it terminates the inner loop, right? We talked about this back in one of the earlier videos. We talked about break. It terminates that inner loop. Return terminates the function, okay? So you can think of it that way, okay? Now, down here, what if I just said I pass false? Instead of saying explode equals false, I just pass false. I can run the module, and again, it works just fine. Okay. The nice thing about having this up here is I can choose to pass it a parameter or not. Okay? That's what that's doing. In this case, return, however, is what we're kind of talking about now, is it terminates that function right then and there. Okay? It doesn't do anything after that. It ends the function, and control goes back to wherever the function was originally called from. So return really has a couple different applications. You can return expression. You can return the value of a variable. And the thing is, that could be anything. It could be lists, integers, floats, string. Basically, any data type can be returned. Or you can just say, let's just terminate the function right then and there. So a lot of flexibility with functions. You can return 1, 2, 3, 5 different variables or values. You can return expressions. There's all kinds of things you can do with value returning functions. Just remember, if you return a value, you better have a variable that can hold your value, just like we talked about earlier with one of our value returning functions. Okay? All right, well, hopefully that gives you a little bit of understanding about functions. The next video we do, we're going to get a little more advanced, and we're going to create a much bigger program with other functions and talk about how we can do some extra things with them. So, any event, you can check those out. This code, what I'll do is I'll see if I can't put some of this code up in the appropriate weeks with the on GitHub. If not, you can always pause the video and type the code in throughout. All right. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. Otherwise, I bid you good morning, good afternoon, good evening.